Okay, today we are going to talk about death. I like my little microphone here. This is new for me, so that's a little fun. I want to give a different perspective on death. I have been a medium. I'm a medium. Shouldn't say I have been, but I've been a medium for a while. Done lots of readings with lots of people. And some of the biggest things I've been learning through, spirit on the other side, is if you want to call it on the other side, the notion of death is so misconceived, especially here in our Western world, of nobody's ever really given an explanation of anything more, especially in our modern day world to now. And, you hear the stories and all the things from ancestral and all that stuff. Of course, there's always stories out there about it, but at the same time, there is more to it, I think, than a lot of us have been told to believe, especially, like I said, here in the Western world. And it's so funny because we want to call ourselves, the first world type of people. And yet at the same time, I feel like the ego is so involved in that first world thing because we do have, to some degree, certain privileges that allow us more choice, allow us to have different opinion, on a lot of different things, right? And so you can find anything on the internet these days to go along with whatever your opinion might be. And so I think death is a fascinating subject to me anymore because of what I have learned. And so I really want to share that with you guys and hopefully maybe give you a different idea on what grief and death can mean to all of us. So, like I said, I am a medium. I am a psychic. I'm a lot of different labels. I don't particularly like labels, but I understand how some people like to have something to refer to, so it gives maybe some kind of understanding. So if you're not familiar with mediumship, it is, speaking with loved ones who have crossed over out of this world. So one thing they keep saying is always remember this is not who you actually are. You are not human. You are a spirit having a human experience. And that is the most important thing to remember because of the fact that when we die out of this body, that's all it is. You're just transitioning out of the physical and back into a pure energetic source. Hence why when you hear people like myself saying, oh, well, I can talk to the dead, because it is still, they're not really gone. They just transform in a different form. And so if you really think about it too, Nikola Tesla often talked about, sorry guys, if you see me rocking a little bit, it's because I'm tapped in and I'm thinking and listening and trying to spit it all out at once, but making sense out of it at the same time. When you hear about like even Nikola Tesla and all the things about what he discovered here about energy, and he talked a lot about how frequency was more available than anybody ever had thought it was. And there was a lot to it, right? And so there's a lot of people way back when were even talking a lot about how frequency was this really big, misunderstood kind of thing that a lot of people I don't think really recognize the power behind a lot of that. And that's what many will call that inner power within all of us. So when it comes to the death per se of a physical body, that's all it is. It's should be more a word of transition rather than dead, dying, gone, that's it, because that's just not the case. And if you've ever had a reading done, particularly mediumship, you had a good reading and you had things that resonated and were brought up for you. I mean, it's pretty amazing, and it can be really mind-blowing when you actually get proof to say to yourself, hey, I think I need to challenge my beliefs on what death even is, because there's this whole different factor to it that so many of us were just never talked about. Of course, in certain cultures, it's definitely talked about more in different aspects in different ways. So let's take Mexico for one example. They have their Day of their Dead, which is a celebration, literally a celebration, of course, for anyone that has passed out of their physical bodies, but they literally invite them all into their space, right? They're celebrating, they're reconnecting with their loved ones in this different way because they understand that they are not gone, that they are still in existence somehow. It just might not be visible to our physical eyes. And when you actually think about the physical eyes, we're actually very limited in that aspect as well, because your physical eyes are only meant to make sense of the physical world. And yet the physical world has to come from somewhere as well, which is all energy. So that's where you'll see also here talk about the third eye being able to perceive and see different types of energy, which, either be the pictures in the mind's eye or anything like that as well. So there's a lot of different ways of going about, how you can perceive death. And I am not here to tell you there's a right or wrong of doing so. I just want to show you that there's a very different perspective that can come along with it. So with understanding as well, so even from the time I was a child, I never really liked the stories of like oh, that's it, they died, they're gone. For me, it never made sense because there was a deeper part of me that just seemed to understand there was something to this that no other human was really able to kind of talk about or explain to me or really even had answers. A lot of people never really thought about it. A lot of people don't like to think about it because the instantaneous they think about a loved one passing out of this body and no longer being here in the physical means that they're just gone and now they're left with all this grief and they're left with all this sadness and this source of missing something that was a part of life in the physical, but yet totally misunderstanding the fact that you can build a different type of relationship with those loved ones. They don't go anywhere. They just again change that form. And so for me, I had a hard time with it because no one was really able to give me answers. And so sometimes I get myself maybe in a little bit of trouble asking certain questions. And I obviously maybe triggered or irritated other people by asking those types of questions because they weren't able to give me an answer. And so many people want to be right, especially in school and all the things. And so I sometimes had a hard time with teachers because I would ask questions. I remember challenging my biology teacher every now and then on certain things because it didn't really make a whole lot of sense in my mind, right? And so, we would talk about death and the decaying of the body and all the things. And like, of course, that made sense because it was part of the physical. But then, I would always want to ask these questions. Well, what happens to the rest of them when they're gone? I mean, that's the physical body you keep talking about, but what happens to this source of energy? We all have a soul, don't we? Right? So I asked a lot of different questions and I just was not ever at that point in my life. I grew up in a very small town. So it just was not this thing. And my science teacher was a beloved woman, and I still am grateful for her to this day because she would often, try to find me answers to different things, and she wouldn't always shut me down. But I was fascinated by a lot of it, right? And so that fascination was there, telling me there was got to be something more to this. And so as my kind of journey continued, and I realized, oh, hey, mediumship's actually really natural for me to do, and I just never really recognized it until I worked with my mentor, and that's when I started to recognize that death had a very different meaning to me compared to a lot of people have as a meaning. And it's really beautiful, actually. And the way, like, you can kind of balance the scales and looking at it like, okay, yes, you do have a bit of a transition for yourself of not necessarily having them in the physical. You can't necessarily pick up the phone and hear their voice in that way, but you can still kind of pick up the phone and talk to them in different ways, right? And there are times where you will hear their voice again. Often people have dreams, and that is your loved one coming in. So it's this really neat aspect that when you start to really challenge yourself and be like, okay, well, I don't have to continue to feel sad all the time. My grief doesn't have to be overbearing all the time. Nobody's just showing you a different outlet of understanding so that you are allowed to release these different emotions and all the things that can come along with grief. And so in this aspect of remembering, okay, well, if death is only of the physical body, what does that even mean? Well, it means that this was just an adventure all along. I have actually been told through mediumship readings in certain ways that people have described it to me of this notion of, how we go to bed every night and maybe you have a dream or something, you wake up and you're like, oh, that was the strangest dream. It made no sense to me really, but it was just a dream. You can kind of think of it like that when we're here in a physical body, when our soul transitions back into that full energetic body again. It's like we woke up from the dream. That's kind of more or less what happens. And you remember everything. You remember who you are. You remember why you came to Earth. You remember all the things you wanted to learn here, experience here. And it kind of all comes back to you, right? It's like the same time every morning you wake up, you might be a little disoriented because you had some crazy dreams or something like that. But all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, okay, I'm awake. I'm back in physical reality here. And that was just a dream. It's kind of something very similar. And so it's in this way where you don't forget everything from your dream, though, right? When you return home, is what they call it. I've just spoken to a lot of different people that refer to as going home, because this is, again, not who we are, right? You're a full energetic being. So when we return out of these bodies and go back to that full energetic being, you will have these experiences of remembering everything. It's like a dream. You get to remember all the different experiences you had, and then you remember everything else from before too. You remember all the different lives you've lived, all the different places you've been as a soul, all the different experiences you've had, all the different learnings you've chosen to do. And so in this way and aspect, it's kind of this really beautiful notion of recognizing, yeah, there can be a lot of pain and suffering here on Earth. Nobody said it was going to be an easy life. But at the same time, we've all come here for a reason. And we've come here not just for our own learning, but a lot of the time to also help in our own way of what can we do here for anybody else that's, coming in or that is going to be here in the coming years as their own experience, right? And so death is this notion where it's just a new beginning. it's a remembering of who we fully are. And I think death can actually be really beautiful because if you change the way you perceive it, it can make your journey with it a lot easier as well. So this notion where so many people, especially like they're reminding me of, when loved ones get sick or you have to do a lot of tending or you're worrying a lot about them because you feel as though they're suffering immensely. Um, it's never going to be easy to watch. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying like this gets to be an easy breezy thing when someone just passes out of your life, but at the same time, it doesn't have to be this overbearing notion necessarily that grief kind of just takes over. So, because a lot of people have said to me, well, my grief can be completely capacitated. Like I'm capacitated from it. I can't do anything. And I always remind people that you're choosing to stay in it. And a lot of people don't always like that choice or that choice of words, maybe, but it's the truth in some aspects because the more you wallow in it and the more you choose to just sit in it, you're never choosing to actually move through it and around it and getting it into a different position so you can actually start to build this new relationship with your loved one. But again, many of us were never told this. Many of us never knew that this existed. Many of us still say, well, give me proof. Well, no, sometimes proof comes when you decide to just believe it. And then it really opens up and it gets really magical. And the sensations of knowing your loved one is still with you in a lot of different ways and not just writing everything off. We like to write a lot of things off as well. I've done a lot of readings where I brought up things and people are like, oh, yeah, maybe, or I've just written that off as whatever, this and that, trying to make it logical, right? And it's just becoming from the belief system we were all given around death. We're gone, that's it, we're done. And a lot of us were told that because a lot of us couldn't get different answers that showed us something different. And so sometimes it's really hard for us to believe something different. It's like that whole saying, when pigs fly, right? I'll believe it when pigs fly. So it's just the notion of deciding for yourself and what you want out of it, I guess, too. Some people will never choose to believe something different and they very well might wallow a lot from their own grief or maybe die from a broken heart eventually, because that is actually a thing as well. It's holding on to all this energy and just never wanting to release it. And some people just refuse because sometimes they actually find more comfort in being sad than they would, choosing to live differently and in a different way, I guess, right? So this whole notion of death is going to be everybody's own perception and how you choose to receive it. So the other thing to tie on this story to give you a bit more of an example of what I mean by death can actually be very beautiful. My dog, when it was her time, just over a year ago now, she decided, she was done. Her body was giving out on her. She had a massive tumor that had been growing, and often we find it happens rather quickly with pets. They seem to be really good one time, for the longest time, and then all of a sudden it's just like one day they're just having a really rough go, and you're really recognizing, okay, there's really something going on here. There's something serious happening, or maybe they're really not well. And my biggest thing was with this dog of mine. I had her for a lovely, beautiful 13 years. She was a golden retriever cross black lab, so she was a larger dog, but my absolute best friend through most of my adult life so far. And so she was a big part of my life from the time I was young adult and those 13 years that she was with me. And she was through lots of different things with me. She walked a lot of through, so I had a very close bond with her. She was really my consistent, I call her, in my life at that time. And I just said to her, when it is your time, please let me know. And I promised to honor it. And I promise that as hard as it might be for me, not wanting you to leave me in this physical realm, I will be in honor of whatever you choose. And yet I know at the same time you will still continue to be with me. And so her day came. And it was hard, of course, but at the same time, I knew that she was ready and that it was going to be a very beautiful passing. And so I brought her to the vet, and my mom and my little brother were able to be with me too. And so she was quite happy because they were such a big part of her life as well. And so they were all able to kind of be there with us. And the vet was, of course, giving her the anesthesia and stuff and talking us through it all. And it was funny because I was just so tapped in with her that I knew, and he was trying to say, okay, well, she might gasp or something here, right? Like trying to tell us that not to freak out if something happens here right now, but I knew it wouldn't. I just knew it wouldn't because I knew it was her time to go. And so as he gave her the last injection to, officially let her out of her physical body, I felt her. I actually felt her pass out of her body, and she started to do zoomies around the room in like that spirit energetic. And I could feel some of my family on the other side that knew her that was there, some of these beautiful beings that I work with, particularly now, but they were all there to help support her crossing over. And I actually was in the middle of snotting in tears, almost laughing at the same time, because I can now feel my dog back to like puppy stage when she would do all these zoomies, right? And so in a way it was really beautiful, because it was like this notion of like she was released from this physical body that was starting to fail her in this aspect of being here, and her time just was done here. And I knew I'd be fine. I knew it was the right time because she had been on my journey, and I knew that I had come a long ways with her walking by my side. And so it was really beautiful at the same time, knowing that she was no longer suffering in a physical body, and that she was able to fully be, back to her puppy self on the other side as well. And then we left the room, and I was still kind of giggling because I could actually feel her walking right behind me, headed back to the car, right? I was like, okay, we're going home, so it's really and of course, our pets transition and take a little bit of time to all of a sudden recognize, oh yeah, we're not fully here in the physical anymore. It doesn't quite work the same way, but it is one of those things that it's beautiful. That's what I mean by it's beautiful. One other example for you on this, again, to give you a bit of a different perspective as well, was I was able to see my grandmother about a month before she actually passed. She did not live anywhere close to me, and so I was blessed to actually be able to spend a little bit of time with her. Me and my little brother headed out her way a month before. I knew in my gut once more that I wasn't sure how much longer she may choose to be here for, just because, again, physical bodies can start to give out on us, right? And so, as hard as it was, because it's very sad to think about, oh my God, they're not going to be here anymore, and it can be really overwhelming. And I think that's where we kind of can lose ourselves a little bit and get really into that worry and that concern. And really, the only thing you're doing for you is making yourself suffer more, because it really doesn't affect anybody else. If somebody's choosing not to be here anymore, they're not the ones suffering. They're it's the ones that get left behind and are choosing to kind of be in that really heavy, dense energy of like panicking because they don't think that maybe they're not going to be okay without that person in their life in that physical way. So I'm hoping by telling you this and these stories that you can start to see that they're still very much here and around, and that you just need to choose to build that different type of relationship and start trusting your intuition, your gut, and your knowing and those feelings, because those are things we always misjudge, and then we just fall back into the beliefs that were given to us, right? I mean, if you grew up in a family that was really open about this stuff, you probably have different, ideas and beliefs around all of it anyway. But for the most people in the Western world, a lot of us were just kind of told, well, that's it, they're just gone, right? Again, like, and it just leaves you kind of hanging. It doesn't make you feel very good, because again, deep down, you already know this is not who you are anyway. So there's got to be somewhere where we go, and heaven and hell and all these things are totally different topics, which I'm sure at some point we'll talk a bit more about from my own perspective. I am only giving this to, if there's something that resonates for you, great. If it doesn't, that's fine too. But I'm just hoping that by hearing stuff from this aspect helps you, because that's what we're here to do. I want to be able to help you in seeing different perspectives and doing different things. So with my grandmother, about a month later, I got a phone call from my mom. So this is my mom's mom, right? And they're quite close. And I was pretty close with that grandmother as well. And I knew as soon as my mom called, again, there's that gut feeling. I was just like, oh, shit, it's going to be about my grandma. And sure enough, it was. And, my mom said it's pretty bad. We don't really know how bad, but we're on our way, right? So my parents decided to drive, because driving was going to get them faster than trying to find flights. So they drove, and they had to spend the night on the way. And she actually ended up passing that night. So she, chose definitely not to have anybody in the room other than her husband, basically. And I'm not surprised by that at all, because that's my grandma. She didn't want to burden anybody. She didn't want to have to say goodbye, I don't think, either, right? And that can be a big thing as well for a lot of family. They don't necessarily want to say goodbye, because for them, a lot of them can't hold that emotion either. And sometimes then they just decide to stay, and then they end up actually suffering more or longer, because now they're feeling like they need to stay for family or for others. But before that night, I actually went through the realms myself. So I went and visited her. If you've heard of astral travel, that's what I did. I knew where she was, so I was able to find her. And I was able to actually show her what it was going to be kind of like to be able to pass over, right? And I'll never forget it because it was actually really funny. She kind of knew what I was doing at that point in time. She didn't fully understand it. She kind of heard about it. She didn't really have a whole lot of information though about, what I was able to do and these things. And I sat with her on the bed in the astral realm, and I knew she was sleeping likely at that point in time. It wasn't super late or anything, but it wasn't in the evening. Anyway, and I kind of, I'll always remember her kind of looking at me and being like, how are you here? Like this look. She didn't have to ask it though, because that's the cool part is when you're tapped in like that, you don't necessarily need language like what we're speaking like right now, right? Using English, using my voice. And so it was this notion where I could feel this, how are you here? She knows I don't live close. And so it was this kind of weird moment for her of like, how are you sitting on my edge of my bed right now? And I kind of laughed and I said, "Yeah, I am here. No, nothing happened to me. I'm here. This is part of me understanding, how this energetic stuff works, basically." And I said to her, "I brought some people for you." So she had two of her brothers already pass, and another family member of ours that she was quite close to as well. So I had asked all of them to show up to show her that there was nothing to be afraid of, because I could tell she was a little unsure, right? As many people are. Again, if your beliefs are not around understanding that death is nothing to actually be feared, then a lot of people, come back to the physical and that's all they've ever known. And so for a lot of people, it's a fearful kind of deal sometimes because they don't know what's going to happen when the physical is no longer, right? So anyway, I was able to show her family, and it was this funny notion where she kind of just kept looking over my shoulder, and she'd look back at me, and she'd look back over my shoulder, and she's like, and then all of a sudden it just finally clicked, it just clicked, and I could just feel this beautiful sensation of peace come over her, and I was like, okay, she got it. And then she grabbed my hand, and she grabbed my hand, and she said, "I love you." And in that exact moment, I knew that she was good. She was gonna go. And you can see the tears come because it's still this really beautiful moment that now gets to live kind of like rent free in my head, and this really beautiful connection that I got to have with her, even though I couldn't see her in the physical. And I just wish that for more people, because this is what makes it easier, you know. These are not tears of sadness. This is tears of gratitude because I was able to do that. And this is where I just wish for so many more people to have an understanding that it can be this really beautiful aspect. Even maybe that's the only way you get to say goodbye is through the realms, but at least you kind of get that notion of knowing, like, hey, I wish you all the best and I'll see you soon, because as soon as you cross over, I'll have that connection. And no joke, that is what happens, by the way. But after I did that with her, I got this nudge to kind of go look out my window, and it was really beautiful. I saw it was a double rainbow, and the wildest part was it hadn't rained, nothing like that here. And I could see it off my little deck out there. And it was a double rainbow, and then these two geese flew by, and it was just this notion where they were like, yeah, she's probably going to go sooner and later. And that, to me, I just knew it was usually like within the 24 to 48 hours. I have done this with other people, not quite the same way, obviously, because this was my own grandmother, but something similar, to help them just understand that they were going to be okay, and that it was their choice. So that is more or less why I think my own understanding on death obviously is very different, not just because of my own experiences, but I challenged myself to allow myself to find something that resonated more with me and that made it more, I don't even want to say easier to deal with, but more of this notion of, like, I guess seeing the larger picture, right? Not getting so stuck into the physical of, like, anything anybody else tells you that's got to be the truth. Well, where the fuck did they ever get it from? Like, when you really start to think about that, like, how many different things will be passed down or talked about and all this stuff. So it's just this different notion of, like, when you really start to think about, well, where the hell did they ever get it from? Whoever taught them that was how death works, or and you start to see it on a larger level of, like, okay, well, who's asked the questions, who's challenged it, and who hasn't, right? Because a lot of people who haven't challenged it will always say, well, I don't know, that's just the way it is. Right? And it's just not true. It's just not true, because this whole world is created by us, and what we choose to believe is what you're going to see and what you're going to find out there. So when it comes to grief, the other thing about grief I want to hopefully get across to other people, and maybe this will resonate for you, is that grief is actually just a notion of a transition. It's a transition type of emotion where you go from understanding that, of course, there's got to be a different you that comes out of this because you don't have them here necessarily in the physical world anymore. But then you get to build a different relationship with them from the other side. But you have to trust yourself and your intuition to do that, because energy is so much more subtle than our physical world is, right? It's not super solid all the time. So the notions and the things that come through. So one of the things I often get said to is like, well, I have lots of memories pop in and they make me really sad when the memories show up. Even if they're funny memories, right? A lot of people will like get sad by that because they automatically just go straight back to, oh, well, they're just not here anymore. And they get sad by those memories. But honestly, those memories are coming from your loved ones. They're trying to tell you that they're right there with you in that exact moment. Maybe you need a laugh. Right? Maybe you're taking things a little too seriously. And they're like, here, let me just give you this funny memory. Or something reminds you of them, right? You see something or you see someone. So I've actually, not only for myself, but I've had this happen and stories told to me from a lot of people that they'll be walking in crowds, or out at the store or something, and kind of just bypass somebody and out of the corner of their eye, they're like, oh my God, like I could have sworn that was them, like my loved one that passed, or somebody that I know that is no longer actually here in the physical. And it's like you can see it in someone else's face. But then of course when you look directly at them, it's not, obviously them. But see, the thing about the corners of the eyes is this perception where you actually see more energy. And so some people have actually had quite a few different notions of seeing their loved ones and other people just out of the corner of their eyes, right? But again, your loved ones are just trying to show you that they're still here. And so they'll use those kind of illusions to try to show you that they can kind of play with your reality a little bit, right? But it's still up to you to whether you're going to believe it or not, right? So I hope that this helps you in some way of understanding these things in this different way. And hopefully by seeing me super kind of vulnerable in certain ways shows you that, the tears are not always bad and that they can be different types of tears. And there's some pretty cool research about water around that aspect as well. And research actually on tears, when people have had sad tears, happy tears, all the different things. So your emotion actually shows up in the water that may come from your body. And that is a release. And that is good. As much as like I started to tear up and been like, oh my God, I don't want to be tearing up on this video right now. But at the same time, I'm like, well, why not? Because that's what makes this a human experience for me too. I'm no different, as much as some people want to say that I am. But it's just because of my beliefs are different, right? And so people put me in a different category, and that's fine. I mean, that's up to them. But everybody can believe whatever you want when it comes to death. So I hope that you choose to believe something that suits and resonates for you a little bit better and allows you to process your journey better, because no matter who we are, we will always be in position to have people leave before us, right? Whether it be pets, friends, family, there's always going to be somebody. So remember, it's not to hurt or harm or because, make you upset because they left you. They didn't leave you behind. All they did was return home to be with you in a different way. Okay? So my name is Dana, and I have a bunch of different course stuff as well that I have on links to down below in the description. And please subscribe to my channel, because I will be putting out a lot more content and hopefully able to just give different perspectives on different things to help people resonate with what your truth is going to be on all of this. So I hope you have a great day.